President Trump is at his golf course in Turnberry, Scotland this morning, where at any minute he'll meet with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. This comes one day after announcing a major trade deal with the European Union, and that agreement sets a 15% tariff rate on most European goods and secures new investments in the US. President Trump announced that deal yesterday alongside the European Commission chief. The agreement was reached just days shy of the White House's August 1st tariff deadline. That's Friday. So this avoids a trade war with the US's largest trading partner. CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand is tracking the latest on this for us and joins us from the White House this morning. Good morning to you, Natalie. Break down the details of this new trade deal for us.
Good morning, Errol. Well, from what we're hearing from both President Trump and the European Union Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen, that 15% tariff, they're describing it as really across the board on most European goods. That is significant because it's substantially lower than what had been threatened, the 30% tariff that was set to take effect Friday, unless this deal was reached. So now we're hearing about this 15% tariff, including on autos, from what we understand. The president also saying that the EU will purchase $750 billion of U.S. energy as part of the agreement, invest $600 billion in other sectors, and will also buy an unknown amount of military equipment. Still waiting for details on how those investments will work. But this deal in and of itself is significant because, as you noted, this is a top trading partner when you look at just the volume of imports and exports. And it was also a very challenging negotiation since we're talking about 27 European countries, some of them with different interests. But at the end of the day, the European Union Commissioner Chief notes that everyone wanted stability. Businesses on both sides of the Atlantic wanted predictability, Errol.
And Natalie, despite the president's trade accomplishments, he continues to face questions over the Epstein investigation and the files. How is he responding to that now?
And he's really trying to brush those questions aside. Here's one of the questions he was asked while in Scotland amid these negotiations. Take a listen.
Mr. President, was part of the rush to get this deal done to knock the Jeffrey Epstein story out?
Oh, you got to be kidding with that. No, had nothing to do with it. Only you would think that. That had nothing to do with it.
So again, the president not wanting to talk about this while abroad, but here in the U.S., there's still this bipartisan pushover on Capitol Hill for more information about the Epstein files. And now we're learning that some House Democrats are actually pushing to try to obtain that alleged birthday book from 2003, which was the focus of that Wall Street Journal article that claimed President Trump had written Epstein a suggestive birthday letter back then, before any of the charges were brought forward. The president, of course, has denied that. He's suing the paper. But again, the Oversight Committee on the House or in the House wants more information. They also want to subpoena Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell to hear more from her. That follows the day and a half of interviews by the president's Justice Department. We don't have information about that, but according to her attorney, she was asked about more than 100 people, Errol.
Wow, and we'll have more on that interview and the latest on the controversy later this hour. Natalie Brand, thank you very much. For a closer look at the trade deal just announced over the weekend between the EU and the US, we jump over now to Koen Verhelst. He's a trade reporter with POLITICO in Brussels. Good morning to you, Koen. What is in this trade deal? We heard our correspondent Natalie Brand explain that energy is a key component, but what does each side get out of this now?
Well, for the EU, it's mostly a relief, let's say, like that there will be a standstill, that there will be no longer an escalation. They will not face 30% tariffs on Friday, as Trump was threatening just 2 weeks ago. So for them, it's really quite a steal to get 15% across the board. And then on top of that, they will have to invest in the U.S. in manufacturing. But this is something that they say that the European Commission here says that will already be happening anyway. And they will also buy a lot of energy that's both gas, oil, and nuclear fuels. And the cooperation will intensify on things like chip manufacturing. There will be zero for zero tariffs on things like aircraft, which is a pretty huge chunk of the transatlantic trade. And well, I think the most important thing for the EU is that they have insurances that sectors like pharma and cars will be tariffed at maximum 15%.
Well, let me ask you more about that, because yes, 15% is better than 30. But when you think of things like energy and defense equipment, these are all high-level things that don't necessarily touch people in their pocketbooks. So in practical terms, what might this mean for US consumers?
Well, I think, in the end, it's not the EU that pays these tariffs, right? It's the importers on the US side that will initially pay these tariffs, and they might then decide, okay, this will trickle down to the consumer in the end via the end product. So consumers might see it in some degree. Of course, the trick is, if you buy a car that is made in the US with, let's say, European steel, the steel is maybe not such a huge part of that. The eventual price tag, labor will be much more significant. So the question indeed will remain how this will affect consumers. But I think in the end, if you have 15% tariffs, it will be less inflationary pressure than when you would have 30%. So this will probably be good for American consumers as well, even though they might still see price increases even with 15%.
And this is happening as government officials from the US and China are set to resume talks in Stockholm today. Does this increase the chances of a breakthrough there?
Well, what I read yesterday, the latest was that there is kind of expectations that there will be another freeze for another period. I could imagine that there is, quite some scope to take a breath from the Trump administration with all the trade deals that have been coming through. They're careful, let's say, right now with what they've been. They've agreed a fairly decent deal with the EU. I think also the EU is quite relieved. So now the next focus will be China, and I would imagine they need a bit more time to get that sorted out.
All right. Koen Verhelst joining us from Brussels, just past 1 p.m. in your part of the world. We appreciate your time today. Thanks for being